destiny, growth, innovation,
honor, leadership,
influence, inspiration, safety,
corruption, power,
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 money, prestige, and power.
Times embarrassment.
Leadership, responsibility.
Leadership, respect.
Navigation abilities.
Extraordinary complex issues.
Your decisions have major consequences, not just for yourself, but for other people around you. And if you've never sat in that chair, you've never been in that role, we certainly don't want to test drive it with the most powerful position in the world.
I think the benefit of having a strong president is their ability to communicate to the American people and act as a leader and show themselves as a leader.
Around the globe, it's more of representation of who we are and what it's like to be an American, and hopefully create a sense for other countries to want to be more American, right? To kind of have our sense of democracy and freedom and some of those other, wonderful attributes that come with being an American.
I like to feel like when our leader's sitting at the table, that person is able to connect with other leaders and work in a positive way.
I think the benefits are endless. I think, countries still look to our president as somebody that, can get things done and can help out when in times of needs.
Having living here but being from a different country, I think the international aspect of the presidency is crucial.
I think that he or she plays a very important role as far as how people feel about the country and whether or not they're able to hold their head up high as they're traveling.
The benefits to us are for those Americans that are not well-traveled, for those Americans that are not aware of what goes on outside of their own neighborhood, outside of their own communities, outside of their own state, is the president becomes the lens of the world for people who aren't worldly. And those decisions that are made as the president, those in Congress, are worldly decisions.
But I think it allows the president to drive some of our priorities and what's important to the United States going forward. So whether that be in the form of national security and working with other countries to ensure our security, or driving the world economy and really putting the U.S. in a position to really leverage our size and our power in that regard.
I think that's important to have somebody who knows how to be a diplomat, because their diplomatic procedures will, determine what we do and don't get from other countries.
The ability to calm a nation, the ability to make us all, whether or not it's true, believe that we're going to get through today, to tap into those times when it's tough, are some of the really hallmark moments that you can look back at presidencies and say, at that moment they were presidential. At that moment they were the leader of this country.
With whatever strength there is within me, I will continue, and so will my associates, to do just one thing: to work for 168 million Americans here at home and for peace in the world. That is all.
What qualifies an American to be president?
Well, by the Constitution, I believe 35 years of age.
Unfortunately, the only qualification you need is to be 35 years old and be a U.S. citizen. But what I think qualifies somebody is to have, first of all, be very well educated, have a thorough and complete knowledge of the law.
Someone who understands the world, someone who really understands the issues, someone who is self-aware.
What qualifies a president is someone who's actually able to deal with political issues, someone who has, well, to me, it should be someone who has a background in politics, someone who maybe had been a lawyer, a senator, or a congressman.
You have to be balanced, you have to be educated. It would be nice if you have some military background so you understand the power of the military, the checks and balances within the military, and how the military works as a whole.
I do believe that the presidential seat should have some sort of acumen in the space of policy, political, legal, as well as marketing. I think all of those are important because you can't communicate a message and expect people to take it in if they aren't good marketers.
I think they need to have a broad background. They have to have some knowledge and working knowledge in our government, but then also I think the private sector and their ability to be successful in that area. Because when I look at the government, it's not much different than a large corporation and how it operates. So if you're going to be the CEO of a large company, you need to have the ability to understand what the priorities are for that company and drive it forward, very similar to what the president does with our country.
I think a depth of knowledge and experience, not only just politically, but also being worldly, having traveled, having experienced living in different situations, being around different kinds of people.
Where have they been in a situation where diplomacy was needed and they were able to work through a pretty difficult situation as far as influencing others that have a very different belief system, and that they were successful in that endeavor?
The unintended consequences when you're the leader of the free world and you're dealing with some third world countries full of strife, it means life or death for people, typically in those countries, but also for American citizens as well.
Again, this is a person with nuclear codes, so you have this person who is supposed to keep a cool head and determine whether or not we go to war with people. It's a big deal. It's a pretty big deal. I wouldn't want the job, that's for sure.
From my perspective, what qualifies someone to be a presidential leader would be someone who is fit in mind, fit in body, fit in spirit, and actually has run something of significance, be it a company, be it a enterprise, be it a local or even community environment where they've actually created ambassadors, created people who can help deliver the message. That's who I think would be the most appropriate to hold office as president.
I think this is something that's really changing now, and we're seeing it because we've had presidents from all sorts of backgrounds now run in elections or in some cases be elected president. So I think there's no magical template right now. I think as long as you have good ideas, as long as you connect with people, those are really the two elements I think that are most important.
I think you have to also have a sense of balance to truly not only be president, but to be an impactful president. I think you've got to be able to want to bring parties together.
People that downplay that, the appearance doesn't matter, I think they're kidding themselves, because I do think it plays a huge role. And I think that as far as, what we're looking for, what they should sound like, it's just somebody that's assured of themselves, somebody that's confident, somebody that, can sell their views, but at the same time looks believable that they actually believe that and live the lifestyle that they're, exuding.
It's funny to say that a president should look presidential, but that's almost an adjective at this point.
Well, I don't think there's any particular look that the president needs to be it, white, black, brown, green, purple, whatever. I just think the president needs to hold themselves in a certain almost reverence. I mean, they are so important to the world.
Class, elegance, intelligence, charisma. I think charisma is really important for a leader.
Charming. You're definitely a president with personality. A likable president, one that doesn't come off brash or insane or angry or full of rage.
What matters to me is their character, but I think that comes through in how they carry themselves. I think they should appear very confident, intelligent. I think they should be calm, especially in times of crisis. I also think it doesn't hurt if our president has a kind smile and a bit of a sense of humor that they show from time to time.
If you look back at the presidents that have been in my lifetime, probably the only one that you would say didn't have that, you know, certain look, whether it's a good, you know, good looking, polished, clean cut, was probably Richard Nixon, who probably looked the least presidential.
I think back to, you know, sort of a lesson in history back when President Kennedy was running against Nixon, who was not the president at the time. You know, during that, one of their big debates that they had, the people that listened to it on the radio, as opposed to the people that watched it on TV, the polling was significantly different. Whereas people that watched it favored Kennedy, who was sort of a dashing, you know, good-looking guy, and the people that listened to it favored Nixon, who, you know, wasn't as good-looking and sort of an older gentleman.
This country was founded on this optimism for, hey, you can do anything, you know, and the fact that kids say, hey, I want to grow up and be president of the United States, and that should be something achievable. And so when I see somebody that, you know, immediately, if it's an African American, okay, you know what? Like, the odds were not in their favor, and damn it, like, look at, there they are. And maybe I don't want to be president of the United States, but maybe I want to be a doctor or a writer or an artist. And if somebody like that can rise up and do that, well, you know what? I think maybe I can follow my dream. You can look back and say, whether or not you agree with their politics, that, you know, over the course of the last several presidents, President Obama looks presidential. You even hear the pundits say he's taken on a presidential look. It doesn't work for everybody. You could say that perhaps someone that had a failed presidential run, like Rick Perry or Mitt Romney, had that certain presidential look, whether it was a polish, a confidence, a certain air about them.
I don't personally feel like there's any kind of physical characteristic, whether it be racial, gender and ethnic, age, ability. I don't see any of that as being relevant to how I envision the president. But I do want the president to have an air of elegance about them. So I do want to see that that person carries themselves with the utmost confidence in their own physical form.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
The leader of the free world, I think there are, it's a very complex and complicated question that I don't think is easily answered.
I think the world does view the United States as the superpower still, and that's the face and the head of the country.
I think our president is one of the leaders of the free world. When I was growing up, it's interesting because I grew up in a civilian family, but I had the sense, and of course this was the 80s and 90s, that we really were the #1 superpower. I kind of bought into that idea. I look at the mess that happened in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I look at ISIS, and I think about the ways that we contributed to that, and I'm like, we're not the #1 superpower if we have insurgent groups coming out to do these things, and it's just this ragtag business that's happening over the internet. So, no, I don't think our president is the leader of the free world.
I think that he could be, or she could be the leader of a free world. I think Obama did outstanding work and is still doing outstanding work to promote that. We shall see how it's going to change.
Economical power that we have. So if you get on the bad side of America, it's, from a country's perspective, it's not a good idea. Just economically, because some of the things that could happen.
From the leader of the free world standpoint, I think the president's role has diminished as we've got a more globalized economy, as even certain ideologies such as communism that may still exist have definitely taken on a much more capitalistic undertone. I think the president is the face of the United States. I think the president is the leader in terms of what the world sees as the West, I don't necessarily think today the president is the leader of the free world.
Absolutely, the president is the leader of the free world. That's why the president's so powerful. That's where the power comes from, is he's what represents everything that's, I think, in a lot of people's mind, what's good about democracy and the free world and what everyone really wants to strive to be.
I think he's one of very few individuals that lead the free world. I think back in the day he was the leader of the free world, but currently I don't believe that's the case. I think there's a few individuals that lead large countries that set the direction for the world.
I think that through globalization and the rise of other countries and we're exposed to more and more news and education about what's going on in the world. I think you've seen other leaders, other countries sort of take charge and have their own sort of supremacy.
All the other countries in the world do still see the U.S. as the one superpower, and he's the leader of that. So as such, he dictates worldwide policy. Even our enemies do what we want them to do, and our friends are always in line as well.
The leader of the free world, I think, was a term developed in the Cold War era, like in the 40s and 50s, and I think it was used mostly for propaganda. And I think it was true, perhaps, at that time. I kind of think with the new world economy that the U.S. and our president has a seat at the table. I don't think they have the head seat at the table.
Going back 35 years ago to the Iranian Revolution, I know that the US government had a lot to do with the British government and all coming together in the Iranian Revolution that came about. And people have a lot of different theories about how the revolution in Iran came about. But I do know that the US had, the US government at the time had a lot to do with it. And it does impact what happens later on in life. So whether it was a good thing or a bad thing, it's not up for me to judge. But United States of America is a very powerful country, and what they say goes a very long way. I'm actually really in favor of the US getting involved in the politics of other countries because, again, of the fact that they're so strong. They come with a lot of allies. What they say goes a long way. So if it involves bringing peace in the rest of the world, then I'm all for it.
I am thankful that we are because while we're not perfect, not even close to being perfect, our ideals are definitely there most of the time, and I could think of a lot of countries that I wouldn't want to be the face of or leading the free world.
Toward this end, I will suggest to the Soviet Union that we institutionalize regular ministerial or cabinet-level meetings between our two countries.
A lot of the problems in the world right now, we need someone who's willing to be real and authentic and really come across as an expert so that when it does come time for them to be able to influence either domestically or internationally, they have the respect in order to do that.
I think the president has a tremendous amount of power, specifically to set the agenda and direction of the country.
I mean, I see our country as being one of the major superpowers in the world.
I think the president probably has more symbolic power than actual governmental power.
They don't make a lot of decisions in and of themselves, so I don't think they have a lot of power.
They do have a lot of power because they obviously are the person who's going to represent us with all these different countries.
He is the commander-in-chief. He makes major appointments for the Supreme Court, for the rest of the federal judiciary.
I think the president has a lot of power as far as perception goes.
When you look at the importance of the office of the President of the United States, people may tend to overrate exactly how much power that position actually holds.
The president was originally designed to be a weak executive way in 1776 and beyond, and it's totally morphed into this, not quite dictator, obviously, that's a little bit strong of a word, but he is a commander-in-chief and the chief executive, whereas previously the idea was to have the people represented in full force in Congress and the House. And now he's in charge of, like I said, all the appointments. He wields all sorts of power that the other branches just simply do not have.
You know, they have the ability to veto different bills that may come through Congress, and they really set, you know, where our focus is as a country for at least 4 to 6 years out.
Especially right now, you want a president who's going to pick a Supreme Court justice. I mean, they have that much power where they can determine this person who's in this role until they die, which is insane. So you have things like that.
I think that the way, you know, our country works is we have the built-in controls which sort of balance out each other. So, you know, a president can't take an agenda too far in one direction most of the time.
I would like to believe that the world looks to us for an example on how to behave internationally. So I think our president has a lot of power, not just here, but outside our country.
With certain things, he has a lot of power, and with other things, I feel he has nothing to do. Gun control, for example. I feel the president should be doing more.
Damn it, like he wanted stuff like guns, he wanted, you know, change as far as guns goes. This is very difficult for him to really make any meaningful change, and I think it's been a good reminder, especially recently, of how little power he has.
Because obviously he can't create laws on his own, but veto power is extraordinarily powerful, or the threat of veto power.
The president has presidential power, and it's somewhere between policy-driven and figurehead. The president has to bring in a cabinet. He's much like a coach, has to have assistant coaches that help drive a team. The president is also a figurehead. He's the person who has the authority and the ability to represent all the people of this country. However, the president doesn't have the power to dictate, because this isn't a dictatorship, what happens to the people of this country.
A few things the president's charter is to entertain foreign guests. They're also to pardon prisoners at the end of their term. They're not pushing the button, as most people think.
Probably the strongest thing that a president can bring to the table is the ability to influence Congress and help enact change, enact reform, or even just bring about action at all. And in the absence of a truly strong presence, I think we have what we, to a certain degree, have had probably over the last 12 to 16 years, which is a lot of inaction and a lot of partisanship, a lot of infighting in those houses, which leads to nothing.
The Senate's pretty balanced, you know, almost 50-50 Democrat, Republicans. Congress is always lopsided opposite. So if the president's a Republican, the Congress is usually Democratic, right? And so the president really can't make the decisions, right? Bills get made and you know, enacted by Congress, not by the president. So limited power locally, but national, around the globe, lots of power. Who we do business with, who we have free trade with, economic balances and checks and balances with other countries.
No matter who's going to be your president, I don't think that's going to determine your level of freedom. It really doesn't. I mean, this person is a person who fights for a country. I mean, it seems like people don't even realize that the people who are the head of the states you live in are actually a lot more, they actually determine a lot of your rights more than the president does. The president is on the federal level, and they deal with more foreign policy and all these things that really don't barely affect the state or the cities that you live in.
As a president, if you can move the needle just a tiny bit, you've done a significant job as president. Because really, although you have a lot of power, it's hard to get things done, you know, through Congress and the judicial system. But just by moving it a little bit, you could do a lot as president.
I can't say that anybody that was within their right mind would even want to be president.
Everything in that job is difficult. I'm surprised and grateful when people want to do it. I mean, that only goes so far, but I think that it's probably one of the most thankless jobs there is.
I think the most difficult decision is where to spend their time, quite honestly. I think it comes down to what gets their time and what gets their attention. There are so many priorities and so many issues and so many different interested parties coming at them all the time. I think that's what it really comes down to.
I think probably the biggest challenge is dealing with our two political parties being so split and just not supporting each other regardless of how they really feel, even if they're on the same page.
You have someone who doesn't have much to do with what goes on in specific states. And for example, I'm just going to use like the Black Lives Matter. A lot of people expect the president to say something and do things for stuff that he really has no control over. And so the president has to deal with all these unfavorable opinions toward him for things that he can't even, he has no influence over.
Again, it's just, wanting to change things, and they really can't. It's their arms are kind of tied, and so the president has to be really selective on what they want to change.
They face a divided country. Just because they're elected anymore, I don't think it's a referendum on what their platform was. It's partially, but you look at our country right now, we're about 40 and 10. 40 on one side, 40 on the other, and 10 kind of in the middle.
In a few moments, I will sign the North American Free Trade Act into law. NAFTA will tear down trade barriers between our three nations. It will create the world's largest trade zone and create 200,000 jobs in this country by 1995 alone.
They want to make a difference. They want to make a change, something that's, positive for the country, but no matter what they do, they're going to upset probably around 40%, if not more, of the country. So it's almost impossible to make a difference without part of the country hating you.
That's the way our system is set up, and that's, the way people believe. So, in good times, you're going to have your detractors, and bad times, you'll also have supporters to balance you out as well. So I think it's sort of a unique dichotomy we're in with that.
If the president has to drive a policy or a policy-driven decision, it has to be weighed against, well, who amongst the people are not going to be happy with the outcome? Because you're not going to please everyone. So it's people versus policy, which is really, really hard, because at some point you'll have to make a decision because it's the people of this country. They're the ones that voted you in, or a portion of them voted you in. Thus, the policies have to reflect them.
Almighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic, our religion, and our civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity. Lead them straight and true. Give strength to their arms, stoutness to their heart.
The most difficult decision a president ever has to make is a decision that will directly impact the lives or deaths of American citizens. And that's sending troops into a conflict, it's declaring war.
War.
Some sort of a military action. Are there going to be civilian casualties?
War.
With any war, thousands of people are going to die. Thousands of people's sons and husbands and uncles and brothers are going to die. So to me, that's the worst thing you can do, knowing that you're going to be sending people to their death.
I think those are decisions that, sometimes are made where you're risking, sacrificing lives, but in the long term, it might pan out for future generations. And to me, those are the most difficult.
The toughest decisions are taking these extraordinary complex issues. They're so complex. People want to look at the Middle East and, it's so simple. Let's just bomb things and we'll be done. Or let's just do this, or let's leave them alone, or let's send troops in. Nothing is that simple.
That is one of the toughest decisions they have to make, whether they have to get involved or they don't have to get involved, because they have the largest army, one of the largest armies in the world. They have a lot of supplies. They have a lot of allies in the world. So I think that's a really tough decision, I would think, when it comes to war.
A singular decision is, at what point do you have to figure out there's going to be a major confrontation with a longtime enemy? I read an article recently that said that Chinese citizens, I think something like 2/3 of them, think that the major war with the U.S. is inevitable. And they don't think that they're going to necessarily win. And so I think that, do we have to take advantage of that at some point? Or can we hold them at bay forever? And I don't think the latter is going to happen. So at what point do we say we have to prevent a situation like this from getting to a point where we can't control it anymore?
A lot of the prioritization decisions that are made probably have just as big of a direct impact on people's lives as those sort of military decisions. So policy around even Food Drug Administration type of work. But you know, actually what I'd say is probably the most important decisions they have to make is who they choose on their cabinet, who their advisors are.
But I think the most difficult decisions I think the president has upcoming right now are really trying to make those decisions that also put American citizens' lives at stakes when it comes to our healthcare system. And whatever it may be, people need healthcare, and people are literally dying because of lack of healthcare services, and they need to figure that out because it's been something that's been spiraling out of control, with or without Obamacare.
You know, and I think just the other day they were talking about that they're letting in 100,000 Syrian refugees into the country. Looking with what Europe had to is dealing with, has been, you know, especially Italy, Greece. I think it's a very small number, you know, however, you know, and then you could argue it, you know, is this a problem for America? Well, I mean, if you still consider America as a melting pot, yes, it actually is it's an international problem because, you know, it is an international war. President has you know, she has their work cut out for them, for sure.
That's a tough one. I think probably how to handle international issues. We want to be there to help, but so often when we go in to help, we're criticized when we do, or it doesn't go well, and then it backfires. But if we don't go in to help, then we're criticized as well.
I think the most difficult decisions the president will have to deal with, he doesn't see coming. I think we look at situations such as with Obama. We could look at what happened in Libya. We could look at what he walked into, which perhaps was foreseen, but with the economy. You look at Bush and we could say 9/11. We look back at Jimmy Carter with the hostages. A lot of the most difficult situations are externally driven, not necessarily internally driven, and so they can't always be, you know, easily addressed and glossed over. I think at home, some of the most difficult decisions just simply relate around something as fundamental as the economy and how you can bring together two very separated parties to try to accomplish anything.
People are passionate about politics right now. Something's happened in the last probably 20, 30 years where everyone seems to fall into one category or the other. You're right, you're left, or maybe you're an independent, but that's a pretty small group anymore. So the president represents what they believe in, what they feel, what they're so passionate about, whatever that, you know, that niche or non-niche issue may be. People stick to that issue, and that president, they represent that issue, what they're so passionate about.
Well, I think they start with what's important to them and their families first. So obviously the economy, your job, your ability to make an income, and then what they stand for from the social perspective as well, and if they're in alignment with the individual's beliefs. And I think that's what drives a lot of the passion.
That's the face of the country. I think that the lowest common denominator, and I just mean like everybody who pays attention to anything, that's the one political person that they would recognize. I had a roommate in college that when Al Gore walked out on camera. My roommate said, "Who is that?" Like, he knew who Bill Clinton was, I think, but not the vice president. So I think that's the one person. I imagine most people might not even understand that there are separate branches. So the president is probably the one person they think makes the laws, puts people in jail, starts wars. So I think that's why they're so passionate about it.
I think it comes down to basically people want to win. I think our two-party system has become much like the Super Bowl. I think they choose a side, and we're good, you're bad, we're right, you're wrong. And I think people get really caught up in that and really become fans. And the fanaticism that surrounds elections and our political system has gotten a little bit out of hand.
I also, on the other hand, don't agree with people when they say, well, this president's trying to destroy the country. It's much easier to tap into anger than to inspire or to elevate the people that follow you. I can point at somebody and say that's bad and get you to say that's bad, and then we're all on the same side.
I think it's misguided when there's anger, because you have a right to choose what candidate, or if you believe in a stance that the president takes, and you can be for it or against it, or have a varying degree of support. And if you're not in support of it, anger is not the best outlet. If you have a different cause or a different view, you can certainly support that going forward rather than become angry.
You know, people identify as a Republican, as a Democrat, as an independent, and that's your team. And it's an all or nothing proposition for a lot of people. Really, as a population, we've somewhat evolved into backers of our home team, and will support whether we agree or not with the policy, with a person, or with the situation, regardless of what goes on.
Well, I think it's always important to at least feel like there's somebody who's fighting for you. You don't want a president who's not going to, well, align with your beliefs. You don't want somebody, say if you're a Democrat or if you're a liberal, you don't want somebody who's going to minimize or try to take away all the rights that you feel like you and your ancestors fight to get. And you also, I guess if you're right wing, you don't want somebody who's going to be too liberal and I guess not give you everything that you also felt like you work really hard to get. So, I mean, I guess I could understand it from both sides, but it's really important to have somebody who believes what you believe.
I think that's good for the most part. I think that's people participating in the political system, of having an interest in politics and the way the agenda for our country. I think at times it could go too far, but I always side on the thought that it's good for our country.
And that president, they represent that issue. What they're so passionate about, that issue could be about taking care of the poor. It could be about abortion or issues. It could be about immigration. Whatever it is, they represent what those persons' deepest feelings are. So that's why they're so passionate about that position.
This is what democracy looks like.
The biggest, most rewarding thing a president can walk away with is some sort of legacy. Not a lot of presidents have the ability to have a major legacy behind them. You look at presidents like Roosevelt, what he did. He has a huge legacy behind him with the New Deal and everything that came out of that. Truman may have a legacy ending World War II, maybe a little bit of a negative legacy, but still having the ability to walk away and said, I had this major legislation that changed the course of not only American history, but changed the course of world history, and hopefully for the better.
Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve.
Unfortunately, it often takes not a great moment, but an absolutely terrible moment in time for that to arise.
If I were the president, the one thing that I would want to make sure I could do is have the Supreme Court with all my own appointees. If I could appoint 9 Supreme Court justices, that's what I would want. If I could appoint even 3 or 4, that's what I would want. That's what matters the most. Lifetime appointments for people who can't be removed for almost any reason, you put that person in place. You have like Reagan appointees who are still in the Supreme Court. So I would want to appoint every federal justice in the whole country. That's what matters the most.
Programs that really change our everyday lives and every citizen's lives. Social Security. Also, positive international relations.
For me, the biggest triumphs that we've had are the ones where we're helping make a more equal society. So I think when Barack steps down, he should feel really proud of the fact that we have marriage equality now. I think that's a huge feather in his cap.
Sustainable impact, whether it be especially like on the environment, on social issues, you know, something that's literally going to be in the history books 50, 100, 150 years from now. And that means some sort of pivotal, big, bold, brave decisions that were made during that 8 years that really, really have a lasting impact on what really, really matters.
My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man.
I would just hope that people would vote based on the bigger picture, not just on one or two issues. What direction we're going, how this affects our overall population, what our ideals are, and also how we look internationally as well.
The next president of the United States should maybe try to promote a little bit more of a multiculturalism into US if it hasn't been enough awareness already, because there are a lot of people who migrate here legally in search of a better life, just like me and a lot of people like me.
No matter what, as powerful as it is, it's never the end of the world until it is. I mean, if that happens, then obviously it's over. But as far as the president goes, there's a president that you don't like who's in office. When Thomas Jefferson got elected, the general consensus of the other side is we would rather civil war than Jefferson. And I think that it turned out okay.
Whether you're Republican, whether you're Democrat, whether you're independent, understand at least the basics of the other's point of view, if nothing else so that you can strengthen your own beliefs and be able to talk in a non-emotional way about the other side and enter into healthy debate.
The only thing I would hope, and this cuts both ways, is that whoever our next president is, maybe we can start giving them a chance to do something right. Or not do something right, but do something and not just immediately hate everything they do. We become too polarized. And I'm just as guilty as everyone else. But if there's a way we can, instead of just being at each other's throat from the left, from the right, from the middle, from wherever, and let Congress, let the president actually move forward on whatever it may be and have things get done as opposed to nothing getting done and the status quo being the best we can hope for. Maybe give it a chance.
I think the American people should be less concerned about who the president of the United States is and much more concerned about their local government. I think they should take time to research their votes for their congressmen and senators and mayors and governors and city council people who will certainly impact what happens in their daily lives much more than who the president is or what the president does.
Don't put so much at the foot of the president. Understand how our government works. Read a book. Go online. But understand the importance of not only the president, but also the congressman that you elect. Also the senator that you put in office. The influence of local government.
Your vote counts as much as the next person, so that's important to really, use your voice at the polls and go ahead and vote. Secondly, I think as you look at the candidates, not necessarily look at the surface level, but also look at the substance and what their view is of the role of the federal government in your life going forward and how involved you want that to be.
Be careful who you vote for, because it's going to mean a lot, not only here internally in the United States as a people, but more importantly, the image that it's going to put outside the United States and the ramifications it can have for us, people who love to travel, love to go to countries where we like to feel safe.
Vote, always.
And even if it's not just president, vote for the people that you feel are important to your message and what you want to happen in your country. Just vote. Don't complain, vote.
Americans need to vote. Americans need to understand what their vote means. They need to understand what their leaders are doing and why they're doing it. And they need to have a sense of purpose. Everyone has the right to vote. Fight for that.
Vote, definitely. Doesn't matter which side you vote, you have to vote. And be smart about who you vote for.
Speaking for myself, if I didn't agree with a specific president or didn't vote for one, it would still be the greatest day of my life if I met one or got to coerce with one. You owe that man or woman the most respect that you have as an American.